So I guess like the slideshow said, I am the student body president of Fort Hays State University, and with that, I am the chair of the student advisory committee for KBOR. I have a bachelor's degree in biology and a minor in psychology, and I'm currently a graduate student for the biology department. And my main goal is to go to medical school next year, which I just recently got accepted to. So I'm very excited for that. And when Claire reached out to me to speak about OER on behalf of the Students Advisory Committee, I was really excited about the idea. And she just asked me to talk about the impact that OER has on students. And so today I really just want to talk about one, the impact of course material costs on students. And then two, my personal feelings on the use of OER as a student. And then I also I took the liberty to ask several students their own thoughts on OER, and I will also share those with you as well. And so to best demonstrate this, I just kind of want to take you back in time, back when I was a freshman, which was almost 5 years ago now. So I've been on the Fort Hays campus for a long time, which has actually been really cool to see how they've really started incorporating OER a lot more, because I started in 2017 and it seemed like there was a big push back in 2019. And ever since then, it's been continually getting better and better. But back when I was a freshman, I was not the outgoing person that people see me as today. I was actually very nervous. I think I very often would rather have stayed in my room and just read a book by myself than go out and hang out with my friends. But, Fort Hays really allowed me to grow a lot. It helped me grow in a lot of different ways. But back when I was a freshman, I was super nervous. The first day of classes were coming and I knew it was going to be syllabus days, but I was still a little nervous. I was like, I don't know what to expect. I've never had a class this big. I'm from Colby, Kansas, which is not that big. And I came to Hays and my first class had, I think, 70 people in it because it was my intro to biology class. And I just remember getting the syllabus and just being a little bit overwhelmed because there's so much information on it. But on there were the list of books that I needed to get. And so I continually went through all these classes and I had all these books that I was supposed to get. And so I did what every freshman student does. And I went to the bookstore and I was like, okay, I'm going to find all the books that I need to get. And I found them all. I checked them out and I was in the line and there was a pretty long line. And so I got in line and I finally got up there and they rang them all up and it ended up being $493, which would not be a huge issue because I had budgeted for this. And so it wasn't a problem, but the real problem is that I only had a debit card at the time and I had a $500 limit on my debit card and I had eaten out for lunch that day. And so $493, I was like, okay, please don't decline. There's a line behind me. I'm hoping this card doesn't decline. And what do you know? It does decline. So this nervous freshman now has a line of students behind him waiting to check out their books and his card declined. And so I'm talking to the cashier. I'm like, my debit card, it has a $500 limit on it. Is there any chance that I could just buy half the books today and then buy half the books tomorrow? And the cashier was super nice. She worked with me really well and we got it all figured out. But for me, it was quite the experience. And that's how I remember that it was exactly $493. That's not a made up number. It's because it's kind of burned into my brain. And so as I left that day from the bookstore, I really got to thinking, because kind of how my brain works is I start running numbers as soon as I do something. And I walked out of that bookstore and I was like, wow, $493. I was like, by the end of my senior year, I'm going to have paid $4,000 in books. And so I just thought that was pretty crazy. And although this was my most expensive semester for books, the US averages around $600 per book per semester for books for college students. And so this is really quite an expense for college students. And I later did find out there's a cheaper way to do this, that you can actually rent books. And so that's what I've done in the future a lot more as well. But sometimes you can't get around that. You do just have to buy the books. And this also doesn't include access codes, which are becoming really big. And so there's a lot of expenses that go into it. And so I was disappointed in the money that I spent, because I was thinking to myself, oh, well, I could have eaten out, 49 times with that money. And I think the biggest thing that disappointed me with how much I spent was as the year went on, I realized that I wasn't using a lot of the books that I bought. And so some of the classes that I took, I did use the book. They assigned assignments out of them. I had readings that I read from. But then some of the other classes that I have, they didn't assign anything out of the book. They might do a reading here or there, but for the most part, the book was very minimally used. And so it was, to me, it was one thing to purchase something that you have to have and you're going to use, but it's a completely different situation when you purchase something that you never even open. And so I talked to students and I found out that this is a very similar story across the board for students, for freshman students. Of course, minus the debit card fiasco. That was pretty original to me. So I just want to kind of walk you through the next semesters of my college experience and what I kind of did with this information. And so I started kind of being a lot more cautious about buying and renting books. And so what I would do is, the second semester of my freshman year, I only rented books, and that really cut down on the cost quite a bit. And then after that, I started realizing, I don't need to buy these books that I'm not doing anything out of. And so I told myself, you know what, I'm not going to get the book until they assign something out of it or they do a reading out of it. And so I did that. It was a little scary because as soon as they assigned something, I'm like, okay, I got to go immediately buy the book. But I started doing that. And then I think by my senior year, I was only buying books if they assigned assignments out of them, because I decided, you know what, if they give me readings, I can find information on the internet that kind of supplements that. And I can figure it out. Even though it's going to take more time, I'm going to find the information I need online. And so when I say this, I definitely would not advise that to students because it's not as good as the book. But if it's something that you can't afford a book, that's something that you just have to do. And so the solution that I decided on kind of, I think, demonstrates the problem. The way that I slowly got away from buying books demonstrates that there really is a problem, that students are having trouble affording books. They're not wanting to buy books. And because of that, they're not actually getting them. And so I had a choice to do this. Like, this was my own choice. I could have bought the books if I wanted to, but the problem is that some students don't have a choice to buy books because they simply don't have the funds for it. And so that puts them at an immediate disadvantage. And so what this really makes me think of is, I don't know if you guys have like a large friend group that maybe you were set to hang out with them. And, maybe you had work, you had something come up, you had a family issue, and you didn't end up hanging out with them. And then the next time you're hanging out, they're joking about what happened at that time that you weren't there. So they kind of have this inside joke going on, and you're just kind of sitting there and you're wondering what's going on. You might even be laughing with them a little bit just because you're trying to fit into that inside joke a little bit, try to understand what's going on. But for the most part, you're feeling confused. And so that, I think, is exactly how students feel that don't get the book, because they immediately get alienated. They start talking about what's in the book, and that student that wasn't able to afford the book is now sitting there thinking, well, maybe if I just write down my notes, I can read about this online, I can catch up with some information that's free. And so that's exactly what happens, is you have these students that are immediately alienated. They're immediately put at a disadvantage. And so I think the way that we solve this problem is OER. The Open Educational Resources push is such a good thing. And so I haven't had a ton of classes that have been OER classes, but I do have this one class that I want to talk about. And my professor was really great at doing OER. And it was probably the best class that I've ever taken. It was within the biology department. And my professor even made the statement that he said, I want to use this free book because I know that not every student will buy the book if I assign a book. And he even mentioned, he said, this book is not as good as the book that I would like to use, but because it's free, I'm going to use it. And then on top of that, he even did videos that he found online. And then he also got peer-reviewed articles that we could read. And that way we could really start to learn in a bunch of different ways, because each student learns in different ways. Some students get a lot out of a lecture. Some students get a lot out of a video, and some students get a lot out of just reading it on their own time. And so what this teacher did is he made all of those things possible in a free way. And I just thought that was absolutely incredible. And my grade demonstrated that as well. You know, I had a boosted learning experience, but it also boosted my performance. And when I talked to the students within my class, they just said they loved the class. You know, they talked about how the videos were so helpful that if they weren't understanding something that he mentioned in lecture, they could go look at the videos. And if they didn't understand something, some other students might be reading the book that he assigned. But the great thing is that he had all these different things that we could look into that were free, that we didn't have to pay for. And so first off, I want to give credit to the teacher, but I also want to talk to the effect that OER had on that. You know, I think OER is one of the biggest things that made that class such a successful class. And something I've also noticed, I've never seen OER in a negative light. I've never had a student come up to me and complain about the fact that he doesn't have to buy a book or she doesn't have to buy an access code. You know, they're always talking about it positively. They come up, I don't even have to buy a book for my class because I have a free book, and they're doing videos and they're posting peer-reviewed articles. And there's just so many incredible things that we can get for free that, you know, are able to supplement what a book could. And so the last thing I want to talk about is the students that I talked to. And so I talked to students. I said, you know, what is your mindset on OER? And immediately what I realized is that students don't know the OER acronym. So they thought I was talking about OTR, it's called On the Rocks. It's a bar and grill in Hays, Kansas. And they have really good wings on Wednesdays. So they're like, oh yeah, I like the wings at OTR. But I was like, oh, well, I'm actually talking about OER, which is Open Educational Resources. And then after I mentioned that, they were like, oh, yeah, I absolutely love that. I love when I don't have to pay for a book. And I've even had some classes where I felt like I did better just because there were so many different ways of learning on there. And so once I explained it to them, you know, I didn't have a single student that had anything negative to say about it. You know, they just loved the idea. And they even went so far as to say that if there was a class that was doing OER and they knew about it, they would switch to that class if it fit into their curriculum. And so I think this is something that students really love. You know, it's something that really helps them. And it's something that students really want to see moving forward. And so to close out, I just want to thank Claire for asking me to speak. And I hope that what I shared paints a really clear image of the feelings that students have on this issue. Lastly, I also want to relay the excitement and support that I have for open educational resources being used in classes across Kansas universities. So thank you all for listening.